Welcome to our next installment of the nonprofit, Johnson County's Nonprofit Alliance Nonprofit Ed session. I am playing really fourth string quarterback, which Hawkeyes know nothing about right now. But I am playing quarterback for Ellie Moore, who is at a conference in Washington, D.C. right now. So I am kind of pinch hitting for her and playing quarterback and all the good things. I am so excited to have you join us today for our content. And as I start, I just want to give a heads up to Aaron to monitor the chat to let folks in if you can do that for us. I do want everyone to know that we are recording this session, so we'll be sharing it out with others. So if there's any questions that you would prefer to ask offline and not recorded, I know Paul would be happy to engage with you. I would as well, but we'll save those for a non-recorded session. And welcome. So I am so happy to have Paul Thielen join us. I've been so fortunate this year. I've had a number of interactions with Paul, and his passion for the work of the nonprofit sector, advocating on behalf of the work that we do is just really inspiring. So Paul, thank you for all the support you've given to the Community Foundation and all of our nonprofits this year. We really appreciate that. I'll do a quick introduction just so we can set the stage before we turn it over to Paul. So Paul is the director of the Larned A. Waterman Iowa Nonprofit Resource Center and an adjunct faculty member at the University of Iowa. His primary focus is leadership, governance, management capacities for individuals, organizations, and networks across Iowa. He has designed really hundreds of conferences, workshops, additional programs for nonprofit boards, executive staff, and professionals who serve in the sector. Paul is also a co-founder and vice president of the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance, which launched throughout 2023 and is a really great, important partner again to the Community Foundation. I'm going to give a really strong plug as we begin to the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance. So if you are a member, thank you for being a member. If you are not a member yet, I hope that you will become a member because even just today, there's some very important proposed legislation at the federal level that would directly impact Iowa, and it would impact every nonprofit organization in our country. And having a dedicated nonprofit alliance to help filter this information and disseminate it to all of our nonprofit sectors is so important. We've never had that before. So kudos to the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance for their work in advocating on behalf of our sector. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Paul. So if there's anything you would like to add about the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance, please do.
Sure. Well, the hat I'm wearing today is director of the Nonprofit Center at your University of Iowa. But as Shelly said, and Shelly, thank you for having us. It's been great to partner with you and collaborate throughout these years in terms of building the capacity of individuals who care an awful lot about their communities and oftentimes do so through their work as board members, executives, staff members, and volunteers at organizations across our community. So wonderful to partner with you. And yes, happy to talk at the very end about that legislation. And just what people can do to reach out to their House members in Congress to give their opinion in terms of what that legislation might mean for organizations here in Iowa. But for the purpose of today's talk, let me share my screen here. We're going to be focusing on really that wonderful opportunity that we have when connecting with those folks who have agreed to join us as new board members. And so focus here on new board member orientation and onboarding. I do, thank you, Shelly, for that. I won't go over what you've already shared in terms of, my background. So over a decade here, or in my 10th year at the center, really love working and have the opportunity to work with organizations. Maybe I've worked with one of your organizations in the past, and if not, very happy to make that connection. But yes, very much dedicated to the state of Iowa and the nonprofit sector that makes it a happy place to live. I want today to be engaging, so by all means, raise your hand or use the chat feature if you have any questions. I love questions. Questions are my favorite. I think we learn from each other when we ask questions. But of course, since I'm at the College of Law, we also have the disclaimer that the content here is for informational purposes only. And while prepared by legal professionals, it does not constitute legal advice. So there's my disclaimer. Look at that. Happy disclaimers you get to have. So I always like talking in terms of, what do we want by the end of today to be successful? And we have about another 50 minutes or so with each other. Well, first, I think we want to have awareness and knowledge of the unique role of individual board members and the best practices that we might be able to adopt and adapt for orienting and onboarding them to our organizations. And some of this takes some motivation, right? To explore and experiment with the behaviors and practices that best work for us, because we know that organizations will differ. And so it's in that experimentation and sustaining those behaviors that advance that, that good work, where we think we are able to then, have the outcomes we want to produce with these folks who have now made a commitment to serve our organizations. And we're going to talk about those behaviors, talk about practices. And then what happens in the long term is that we're not only doing, things right, but we're doing the right things when it comes to being an organization. And perhaps because of that successful work, we're more attractive and trusted by our stakeholders. Peers and partners, elected officials, as Shelley was talking about, who are also important as we do our work. Just give a real quick, glance at the nonprofit sector in Iowa. There are over 30,000 nonprofit corporations in Iowa, meaning that they're incorporated. It's the third largest category of entity in the state. In terms of recognized tax-exempt 501c entities, there are 23,000, as my last count, 546 of those organizations, with the majority of those being public charities. We also have private foundations and private operating foundations. And there you see a few breakouts there, with Johnson County having around 1,468 of those entities, and Washington County around 326. Let's maybe ask folks in the room, if you want to use your chat, I kind of want to know who's in the room, would you call yourself perhaps a novice to the nonprofit sector? Maybe you have, some experience, or maybe you say you have kind of expert level experience. So in the chat, if you want to just use the chat to say, hey, I'm really new perhaps to the nonprofit sector and its leadership, or maybe you have some or moderate experience, or if you have kind of an expert level experience, that always helps me kind of gauge just where this conversation should be. So do we have that chat feature enabled? I think we do, right? So people kind of want to put in their responses. Just if you think you have kind of novice level experience or a moderate experience. Good. So Shelley, good. Shelley's going to talk about, expert but always learning. Look at you. How political. You're so wonderful with that. Adam talks about some experience, but of course wanting to learn more. All right, Missy's got some moderate experience. Good. Always learning. Good. Yes. Love to see that. Any other folks want to share? Don't be bashful. The chat is a friendly place. Well, this gives me some sense. Moderate gives me some sense. Expert. I want this to be most useful to you. So we can really dive deep into some of these areas that we're talking about. And I think this can be really helpful for those who perhaps have been doing this work for a bit longer period of time. I want to start before we actually get to electing new board members to serve on the board of directors. I think a lot of important work is done at recruitment. And there's really no level of orientation or onboarding that's going to overcome a process or a lack of a process to intentionally identify and purposely recruit members to the board of directors. That's been our experience. And so, and by the way, I'm happy to make all these slides available at the conclusion, so you don't have to worry about stenographing and taking down notes. And then we have some key questions around this. One is, do those people really know and understand the organization? You might be surprised that some people who join boards perhaps do not. Do they have a sense of answering why they're joining in a board member role? And then have they thought about what success looks like in terms of board service? We think those are important questions to ask. And so the first, do I really know and understand the organization? It's an honor to be offered a board role, right? And we find that successful board, board member and organization relationships is usually built on a foundation of mutual interest in that organization, right? So the mission of the organization, what it does, But it's not just about the mission. We find too that the structure itself is also important to have a sense of. What is the governing board structure here? Is it a working board, for instance, that's going to be asked to do frontline activities? Or is it more of a governing board or a policy, kind of a policy board that kind of, sets direction, sets policy, does governance, but is more hands-off in terms of that day-to-day activity? That's going to be really important because it sets up the expectation for what's this experience going to be like. We know that new entities will, be different than established entities oftentimes in terms of that experience you're going to have. An entity in transition, right? Have we gone from a founder or long-serving executive to a new executive, or perhaps, has the organization changed in other ways significantly? And then current conditions. I will tell you, I think it's unfortunate when people are surprised that first board meeting when they come to find out some really important information about the organization, right, and the conditions of the organization. I don't think that first board meeting is necessarily the best place to reveal something that's significant, whether it's financial conditions or again anything that would be perhaps relevant to someone's service is something we think to be done to help the person before they make that decision to serve. And then with just in terms of conditions of engagement and experience that they're going to have. So that's really important as kind of as a starter. And then the why am I joining? What's really what we focus on here is, the top reasons, that we're oftentimes asked, and see if this aligns with your experience, is because someone who's on the current board, right? Someone is on a current board, and the way that they went about identifying you as a potential board member was because they knew you. You were in their professional circle or their personal circle. Perhaps though you're already engaged with the board or the organization in some way, or you may be someone who's recognized in the community as someone with public stature or valuable knowledge, skills, and or experience. If you're applying or you have an application process, you also want to know what's motivating that person to apply. Are they passionate about the mission? Are they attracted to potentially engaging with current board and staff and others? Are they just attracted to the organization itself? So those whys for us are also an important part. And then, of course, you have just the very, we think, kind of fundamental questions around, do I have the time and capacity to serve in the role? Am I being invited? And this is a big one for professionals. Am I being invited for my professional skills? Meaning they want me on this board to then use my professional skills to advance the work of the organization. And do I want to serve in that way? Or is part of my reason for service is because I don't want to do what I do professionally on a day in and day out basis. I want to have a different type of experience. And so aligning that expectation we find also to be important. Then finally, what does success look like? We can measure success in lots of different ways here. Individually, of course, this experience might give you knowledge or development of skills and abilities that you might not otherwise have had. And so that can be really rewarding. What you can do as part of a group, the committee or board itself, those outcomes that you produce, we know can be rewarding experiences. Of course, organizationally, our mission-focused outcomes, our mission-supporting outcomes are important. And then just how you're impacting the overall, community, the network of entities that serve, right? That serve us to make our homes and workplaces better, better places to live and grow. So that's how success might be measured from our perspective. Questions about that first area about even before you bring the folks in, you've already done a lot of work to set yourself up for success around recruitment. And of course, you can use the chat. Very happy if you want to raise your hand or even just unmute yourself and start chatting. I'm happy with that too. This won't be like my law school courses where I can just cold call on people, right? I can't do that here because Shelly will not.
Are you sure you don't want to? I mean, I hope we can get
No.
someone like mid-bite of lunch or something.
I want hybrid use.
Really call them out.
The important outcome for me is to be liked, Shelly. You know that. That's first and foremost what I crave is that type of acclamation of endearment. But no, if you have something in the chat, by all means, you can use it. But we can move on from this topic into a few more that we're going to talk about. All right. Perhaps some of you know this yourself just in your own lives, but we find confidence comes from clarity, especially the role clarity for this board position. While there are several common requirements that we know for almost all nonprofit board members, right? Those fiduciary duties, those things that are almost common for every single board member. We know that this role will vary sometimes greatly from organization to organization. And so if you have a well-considered board member position description, that's going to help orient new board members first, right? So when we talk about key resources here, we absolutely mean a board role description. And it doesn't have to be, more than a couple of pages, but it will do a lot of work in terms of setting up expectations for the role. There's a few other resources here we also think are important. One is a one-on-one with the board chair. We think that's an important element of this. And then, ideally, if you can have a fellow board member who might serve as a mentor. So let's look at these in a little bit greater clarity. Board member position descriptions. I'll start with what's almost most common is the position requirements, right? Right, here are your duties, here are the activities, right? So we have meetings, so you have to prepare for meetings, you have to participate in meetings. We understand that there might be key events that we want on your calendar because your engagement and involvement is important there. If there's conflicts, here's how we go about resolving conflicts. Position requirements are very common. What we don't oftentimes see are some of those desirable characteristics, right? So desirable characteristics, of course, skills come to mind. So skills meaning practically, what have you developed in terms of, skills around whether it's, writing or being able to, effective communications or decision making, right? There's lots of skills that people develop that can be really relevant when it comes to serving in your board role. And having that expertise on the board be absolutely, essential for successful work. But we don't oftentimes talk about the traits and behaviors, right? And those oftentimes are the source of a lot of challenges when it comes to orientation and successful onboarding is, what do we think are the traits and behaviors that are most important as we set up the expectations for how things will work around here, right? So how, what is our ideal expectation around how we'll treat each other, how we'll consider decisions, the types of behaviors we want you to engage in. There are roles that we ask you to play that really require, intense observation, the ability to be present and observe, whether it's at our own organization or just out in the community and in the world. And so amplifying that at the beginning, gives people permission to then start thinking about those activities as being related, very importantly to their board role. And so we talk about that when we talk about the board position description. And we have various templates of these that I don't think don't look like an awful lot like a lot of other people's. A lot of other people's will talk about position requirements and eligibility to serve. And eligibility might have, term length and term limits included there too that might be borrowed from, the bylaws. But those desirable characteristics we find are oftentimes underutilized. I can even share that. Do you want me to share a current board, like a board role? Let me do that. Let me share.
That sounds great.
Yeah, let me just share what this might look like. You're like, what does this even look like? Can you see that?
I can see it great.
Excellent. So there we go, an XYZ organization. So if you weren't sure about traits, here's literally what we're talking about. Making it clear that we need commitment and dedication. We know it's going to take time. We know it's going to take effort. But we're talking about this in a way that's not about, the duties requirement, but it's about, hey, we know the commitment and dedication are traits we're going to need. For some organizations, you might focus on areas like, the imagination that you bring to this is important because perhaps we're at a stage where we're really trying to conceptualize something new. And so imagination might be a really important trait that we're looking for you to exercise. And that might, require curiosity, openness to perhaps, experimentation and uncertainty. And we all know that not all board members thrive with some of those traits, right? Some people really enjoy structure and understanding exactly what's going to happen next. And so these traits can really be built out in ways and rethought as you kind of update your board description. But what do we think is going to be most important for us to be successful? Confidence and agreeableness. I don't know if anyone here thinks agreeableness, is important or not. Agreeable doesn't mean simply just going along to get along. It just means if we do disagree, we got a way of doing so agreeably, right? The sense of we're orienting the orientation of the organization being successful is the thing we care about. And so it's not about me winning or losing as a board member, are we doing, this work in the best service to the organization? And if you're setting that expectation at orientation, and that's part of onboarding, we'll know it. Like we'll know if you're, actually, exercising some of those traits within your board. Of course, skills, we talked about that a bit, like, expertise. Be about observation and dialoguing, analysis and pattern recognition. That's really a lot of strategizing. for organizations. We'll talk if we have time here about kind of the different sites of leadership and being able to use, that outsight and foresight that we have, for that purpose. But I wanted to talk a little bit about behaviors. So planning, clarifying objectives, and delivering results. Sometimes people are good about the first part. They can plan really well, and maybe can clarify what they're trying to accomplish, but then they never quite deliver, right? And so if we're saying, hey, what we want to accomplish here is the effects of doing all that hard work, then that's a behavior you're going to amplify at the very beginning. Attendance and self-care. So, making certain people are, in a position where they can, attend, but also be of the understanding that sometimes it might not, they might need some self-care time. And we can understand that. And the board chair here becomes important in terms of understanding when that might be the case. And then being listening and encouraging. And then we get into like position requirements. So reasonable care, skill and caution, prudent person, bylaws, all those things, right, that are in, a lot of organizational descriptions, if you have one. Attendance of meetings, contributing to the culture of the organization and all that. So I'll share that with everyone too, as I send this out.
I can't,
Yeah.
I would just add, it's important to sort of set the expectations, in writing as you're bringing on new board members. But I can also say on the flip side, if you do have an issue with a board member, like this is your tool to also use to, rectify or sort of help set expectations if you do have an underperforming board member or someone who really didn't, understand the role that they were needing to play. So having the written description is so helpful on all sides, in my opinion.
I love that. I mean, by the way, most of the time, people know if they're underperforming, especially if you've made it clear what the expectations are. They know that they've been underperforming. So it's almost never a surprise when someone's, pulled to the side and we're talking about the board chair role to be told, hey, how can we help you fulfill this role if you're having a challenge? Missy, go ahead.
Hey, I have a question about how do you backtrack? When you have had a board that has never really had this level of formality and you're trying to rein some of them back in, and kind of get to, do you just recommend not completely starting over as far as getting a new board, but just on January 1st at that board meeting, be like, hey, we are going to go through a board orientation and training and even starting in an interview process and get back to this is the job description. Do you fit? Does this work for you? That sort of thing.
Love that question, Missy. And here's the guidance we would give. Whatever strategy is most likely to get you success. And so if you have an existing board where perhaps you think this would be beneficial, the key is to get their buy-in, right? They have to care about it. They have to want it. And so in what ways can you introduce it? So it doesn't seem like Missy's idea, but it seems like our idea as a board that if we want to have experiences going forward that we think will be even more fulfilling, perhaps these are some of the things we should do in order to be able to get there. What I love is it's all in service to the organization. And almost everyone will agree, typically, especially as you've grown as an organization, things have changed, to say, let's revisit ourselves. Let's ask ourselves some questions about who we are, and then we'll decide how we'll go forward. And I never like to use the word change. What I like to say is, let's experiment with it. Let's go ahead and, try this, meaningfully, purposefully, to see if it yields the results that we think that it will. And you might find that you've got quite a few folks who are really, agreeable to this. And for the folks who want to champion it, find those people. Love the champions of this. If someone says, I'm really passionate about this, I really care about it, yeah, let them take it. Let them, hand it off to them. That would be some of the insights that I would have. Yeah, great question. Yeah, don't get rid of them all and start all over. Right? No. Not that you would ever think that. I'm not gonna. Don't record that shrug. Don't record that shrug. It was a I don't know shrug.
And I would also, I think too, I mean, if you are at a point where you feel like you need to have it, sometimes deadlines, they do initiate action. And so having a line in the sand, at July 1 or the beginning of the new fiscal year, we're going to be adopting these new standards for our organization. We want you to be a part of the development and the formulation of what those are going to be, but our organizational goal is to implement them on X date. So then everyone's working towards a common goal versus having it be loose and kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
So the board chair role, I think is underutilized here when it comes to orientation and onboarding. There was no way I wouldn't have, if I'm a board chair, I wouldn't have a conversation one-on-one with an incoming board member. My role here is unique as board chair, if that's what I am. I want to get to know each member. I want to establish myself as a trusted resource for them. It's an opportunity for me to learn more about you and what motivates you, because what motivates people is a little bit different. And that's the best way I can first learn about that is by having this one-on-one before your term would begin. It's a great opportunity for a lot of board members to ask questions. And some of them can be basic questions, just like, okay, so, meetings and preparation, what does that look like? And who are the other people? Tell me more about them and the organization. And then that can get more complicated as you kind of speak about the people and the programs. But it offers an opportunity to create some clarity there with questions, time for kind of, questions back and forth. And then, and I can't stress this enough, just getting them in the door, that wasn't, you're not even halfway there yet in terms of having, create a successful opportunity for this person to contribute. You have to affirm the importance and continue the excitement that person is bringing into the organization. And again, if we've been purposeful here in our recruitment, then we know why this voice is important on the board. And here's where the board chair can say, this is important that you're here, and you're here because, and again, if you understand that person and you have a sense of that recruitment, explaining why, and continuing to feed that energy that the new board members will bring, because they'll need that. And so that board chair role, underutilized. These conversations don't have to be very long. And once you establish that trust and relationship as being a resource, now that person feels like confident to come to you, perhaps as they might need to throughout their service. So love that board chair role. The mentor is kind of a handoff from that. It builds off from the board chair. And really this could last several months, could last a year or beyond. Basically, your mentors are those who have more experience in the board role at that organization. They're familiar with the people and programs, as well as the responsibilities of board members. And again, here, a great relationship of being able to ask questions, create opportunities, to continue, that process. And here it's about focusing that excitement, I think, in ways that for that new board member are going to be generative. So affirming the reason why they're on the board, but also directing that energy, in their board service. Cannot, again, undervalue that affirmation about why they're there, the role that they're playing, that their voice, is an important one for that mentoring relationship. Questions about that? The board description the board description, the role of the board chair, mentors. You're like, no, this seems so of course we're gonna do that, Paul. We all do that. We're just gonna do it.
I guess I have a question. This is a really good idea, but I'm kind of wondering if there's any tips on how to recruit existing board members to do something like this. Because I think one of the things that we struggled with is folks are really excited to get new board members on, but this always seems to fall for us on just our board chair. Is there, for boards that this works, is it different mentors for different people, so people aren't doing it more than once? Just I guess was curious if you have any tips on maybe how to, because I think everyone think this was a good idea, but I'm just kind of trying to figure out how can I recruit some folks to want to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen it done in different ways. One of the ways I really enjoy is the person who was the latest addition to the board, right?
Oh,
Right?
okay.
The person who was just kind of, maybe brought on in the last few years. If this could be part of their role, which is how can you make someone else's best first day even better than your first day and your first month and, your first year on this board? And again, it's not always then going to fall on the board chair or like the executive director to come up with this, but it could be, looking back, what would have helped you, in your role here? What would have been beneficial to you, and give that ownership. So we've seen that, with, the newer board members then being the ones to take this up as part of, what's going to make that, that next group, or that next individual or group of board members experience even better than theirs was. And so that's what we've seen as a strategy. It could be because it could be your most senior, board members, the people who actually want to do it. I mean, forcing a board member to be a mentor when maybe that's not a strength of theirs would not be my strategy. But at the same time, I wouldn't want everyone to be able to just say, oh, for none of us is this valuable. And it's always kind of that, my response to Missy, is that buy-in, like make it not your idea, but their idea, to say, boy, what would have really been beneficial to you as you entered this role to set you up for success.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? No, Paul, you're thoroughly explaining everything.
Well, I was gonna just
oh,
real
yeah.
quick, one thing, not necessarily a question, but something along the lines of more trying to formalize a process, right? If you have a board where it's not quite this clear cut and that type of thing, something I found in my experience is the knowledge lives with a lot of different people, right? There's a lot of different people that have those little bits and pieces, and trying to just centralize and almost do like a data dump of that, right? Those individual meetings with people, and trying to put together even just a body of knowledge document that is fairly unpolished, but it's kind of a spot where people can go and reference. I think that can be a really good start for developing something like this, because you at least have the content, and then you can start to polish it from there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And so much of it, as you described, lives within people. Like, it might not be written down. It is lived in the lived experience of someone. And so the way that you make that transfer could very well be through, purposeful meetings and conversations. And then being able to, like you said, put that body of knowledge together. Here in a moment, I'm going to talk about a more formal way of doing that around like a binder of knowledge that's more formal. But for a lot of our organizations, they're not always so formalized. And so how do you go about this successfully is that relationship building and engagement. That's where you're going to have that transfer. And that's where it's going to be really important for you to, even more important for you to engage with your fellow board members and other internal stakeholders and other stakeholders too. Love that. So my point around performance comes from familiarity. As we're thinking about successful onboarding, especially, almost all the research will tell us that board members who excel at understanding how their organizations produce results, including the people and programs at that organization, are also more likely to excel in other areas of their role, right? Whether it's advocacy, fundraising, networking, strategizing, and beyond. Knowing the organization, how it produces results, is incredibly important. And so a few key resources here. I always had a question come in from Sarah, so I'll address that here in just a moment. So the key resources here for us will be something like a board binder, which is pretty common, especially for more established and larger organizations. Opportunities for visiting and observing the work of the organization. And then, I'm pretty sure this isn't a word, liaisoning with staff. Being able to actually have an engagement with those who are on the front line. And I see some people kind of giving like a wink or a nod because that third one kind of hit them a little differently, which I love because I'm very unpopular when I recommend the third one, which is why I'm glad we're doing this virtually. So I don't have to have my running shoes on. Before I get to that question, I want to get to what's in the chat from Sarah. This may not fit in this talk, but how do we keep a governance board engaged and fulfilled? We're getting to that right now, Sarah. Governance board engaged and fulfilled. They meet 5 times a year as a board. Organization is functioning well. Concerned they are bored. A board. Oh, I love that. Oh, wordplay. Oh, I didn't know we had wordplay. So far, Sarah is winning wordplay. A board. So if you can beat board, I don't know if you have any prizes, Shelly, but you will get whatever prize is appropriate. But Sarah, I think this part helps answer that question. So what might be in a board binder? A brief history of the organization could be really relevant if you can keep it brief. Some organizations that we inherit might come with a 100-year history, and so hitting those milestones for the organization might be part of that work. Of course, we always want to be at the top of mind, with our mission and vision and values of our entity. including there again, that board member position description. So to Shelley's point, there are no surprises here about what we're asking from you. Just the organizational chart, especially for more complicated entities, but even simple entities. Like, how do I understand both an organizational chart that includes, the board as well as the staff? I mean, for some organizations, that can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. And so I just want to understand how this world is organized. And so I might navigate it more successfully. And including titles and names there could also be really helpful. And then if you really get into it, the bios, right? Like whether it's the board bios or other, organizational chart bios could also be really helpful. But for the board, yes, you want to have, hopefully a photo of them, bio, a contact list. I think that's really helpful. The bylaws, folks love bylaws. I was just editing some bylaws this morning. We all loved it. But they're your rules. You must live by them. So just make sure you've read them so that you think, yeah, this is how we are going to operate. So take a look at those. Meetings and event dates. I think people here will agree. Some of our best people are our busiest people. Get your meetings on their calendar early, right? Get your meetings on their calendar early. So now you have right prominence. You have, kind of first place when it comes to the importance of those meetings and event dates. If you wait until the meeting date's too soon, then all of a sudden, that onboarding process may get interrupted because people can't make that meeting or people hadn't planned for that event. So making that clear, I think, is helpful. If you have a current strategic plan, wonderful to put in that binder. The budget, everyone's favorite, numeracy, right? Everyone loves reading budgets. I love reading good budgets. If you have your financial statements there too. Committees with committee charters. If I don't know why a committee exists, that's really tough, right? Like, what does this committee do? Who's on the committee? What authority does it have? Right? What's the expectations of how they work within this structure? So committees with committee charters, we think are helpful. If you have a nice annual report, maybe some recent board meeting minutes, so you can get a sense of how those are recorded and what's included. And this new member to-do list. So this kind of gets to Adam's point that he was making. We got to set up from orientation to onboarding for these new members. We got to set up for them, I think, a special set of, objectives. So one of those could be, we would like you to meet with either all or an X number of board members, of your fellow board members outside of the meeting, right? And so you can literally check it off for your to-do list, like have a meeting with, each of your fellow board members by such and such, like Shelley said, by such and such a date. That to-do list could also have to do with some of my next points here around, we would like you to attend, this many events, right? For this purpose, right? So attend these events. I mean, that to-do list can be kind of things that you can do that keeps that person, thoughtful around, yes, I got to have these conversations. I need to attend these events. Perhaps there's opportunities that are there, on that to-do list to meet with other stakeholders. And so having a really nice to-do list that builds momentum and gets people engaged with the relationships of this organization. We're all building relationships, right? This is the strength of most of our entities, are the people and how well they understand and know and work together. So that new member to-do list is something that you might also include in that board binder with some nice, nice momentum building checks that people can make as they take on this new role. So what are some opportunities here that might be on that to-do list? Could be a site visit. I mean, these organizations vary so much, right? So for some organizations, like cultural organizations like the theater or whatnot, you're like, well, I'm going to it. So I am in some ways participating. For some organizations, maybe a site visit has to be more planned out because it's not normal for people maybe just to show up. So easier for some organizations than others. But you have to have a sense of how this entity operates, where it operates, behind the scenes opportunities, which even those cultural organizations might be really important to say, oh, there isn't just a fully figured out, produced production here. Like what was all necessary to get us, to this point, I think is really helpful for those frontline experiences. And for some members, they might come as a frontline volunteer or as a former client or customer of the organizations. So especially for those without experience, it's helpful to offer some kind of experiential opportunity if possible. Again, if you have a better understanding of how we do things, you're going to be much better at almost every other role we ask you to perform. And finally, relationships and trust. So this is where I get in trouble. I'll tell you what, I hear from CEOs is, I don't want an inappropriate relationship between my board members and my staff members. I agree. I don't think you should overplay your roles there. I I do not agree there should be no relationship at all between the two. I think there is, a way that we can, have a relationship that also has to do with the trust that's required. Because by the way, if my board and some staff go to create a strategic plan and I don't even know who these board members are, and now they're going to come back to me and tell me, oh, strategically, here's what we'd like you to do over the next, 3 to 5 years. That's a challenge for me. I don't know how well you understand what I do, what we're trying to produce. So I think building that trust is important. Staff presentations during board meetings can be helpful. And again, the board, like I said, going on site visits can be helpful. Keep people in their roles, right? It doesn't mean that you now as a board member can overstep into the CEO role, or that staff members can ask things of the board, right? That should have, its proper kind of process and procedure. But I think this is undervalued, being able to liaison meaningfully with staff. So Sarah, hopefully maybe that answered your question in terms of how do you get a board that maybe is more governance focused to say, I've got a real sense of this organization, who we are, what we do, how we do it, and why it's so important that now I perform my other roles that I'm being asked to perform.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you. I'm doing some of that, but I think what will help is if I get like our events on their calendars earlier, I think that will help. Thank you.
Yes, and Sarah, what I love about the events is too, I give just like one direction of what I would like them to do at that event. So it's not just attend, but it's usually attend and something has to happen. Like you need to meet with X person, or I would like you to observe Y activity, right? I think going there with a bit of an assignment helps people then in that engagement, gives them permission perhaps to engage more meaningfully at those events. Because oftentimes they can be missed opportunities, as we sometimes know. It's like you show up, you're there, you're right, but I think you could be there in a more generative, productive way. Shelley, we are cruising right through. Now, I'm not going to let anyone go early, so I'm just going to keep adding stuff. I hope people know that. Like we're staying till 1, so not asking questions is not getting you out any earlier.
Well, if we get a chance to have a few extra minutes, I really do want to recap for the audience about the House bill.
We will. Yeah, I think we'll take a few more minutes here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of some of these sites of strategic leadership, and then we'll definitely have time to talk about that bill and give people
Great.
the information they need. So what is this all in service to as we're thinking about orientation and onboarding? I think we don't want to overwhelm our new board members, but instead we want to give them permission to be thinking about how their leadership is going to matter throughout their service, throughout their term of service. One of the things we really do really well is talk about the oversight function of board members. We've done really well with that because it's a point of emphasis, because I know my center's been talking about it, the world's been, the community foundations talk about it, and it is really important. So, right, like, having that mission and that mission focus, having goals and evaluating programs, being, a sustainable organization, having a succession plan, addressing conflicts of interests, where there might be risks and being legally compliant. Oversight, we do really, really, really well. The other 3 sites, we don't. So, for example, when it comes to insight, this is what I was just talking about. How well do I really understand how things work around here? Right? We have values, but do we practice those values in a way that creates the culture that we think is important to produce results? I have a sense of our strategic plan, but what about those, strategies and programs and people? How well do I know them? How well do I understand them? So that the next go, by the way, when I say the next go around strategic planning, I don't really mean that. We're always trying to be strategic. So as I'm trying to contribute as a board member, because ideally, almost all of our board member meetings have an opportunity for strategic engagement, do I even understand how to have that conversation or with the insight of how this organization's processes and problem solving and performance works? And then I think with folks as they come in, it's what they're bringing in terms of that outside. Again, undervalued. The fact that you come with certain experiences in the community awareness, of course, it's all with the vision that we have, a shared vision of the future if we're successful as an organization. But your ability to be, curious and to be empathetic, and perhaps there are cultural competencies that individuals will bring that are important, or they're perhaps related or are our peers. All of that is kind of that outside of the world to say it's important to bring that in. It's important for us to know some of that as we're thinking about what we do and the results that we help, produce or co-produce. And then we get to the foresight element around, yes, we have a vision for that future. We kind of have a sense of what's happening in the environment. We can recognize, patterns and the way things that we think, work will work. But all that scenario planning, all that trend awareness, it doesn't mean we're going to exactly figure it out. I remember one group we were working with, they had brought out a bunch of new board members and we were going through some really intense strategic planning. And we were trying to scenario plan for the worst possible conditions. This was like 2019. And the worst thing they could imagine was not having a venue perform. Like, oh, we won't have our performance venue. Not that they would have no performance venues, right? But like, our particular performance venue. But even early in the onboarding process, letting people know, here's what we, are also valuing from you in terms of, that foresight that you could, potentially bring to our organization. We don't talk enough about early on, and it's hard to adopt later. So I would say those are kind of the sites of strategic leadership that even during the orientation and onboarding, you can amplify and make people really aware of. And then that gets into kind of structure, behavior, and practice. And so what helps structure all of this, as we orient and we onboard? Well, of course, our articles, we'll have a role to play here. Our articles kind of set forth our purpose. Things, those are aligned then with our bylaws, which should, again, give us our rules for how we're going to really operate, not aspirational rules, but how we literally do. The board of directors, we talked about that role description. The committees, we talked about charters, reports. I don't know about you all, but if I sit into another board meeting and get read a report, I don't know why I'm showing up to the board meeting, right? I can consume a report, in other ways. The board meeting, and this gets into meetings in the agenda, the board meetings need to be reserved for you taking in the information you need, and perhaps a brief report or an update to a report or an overview of a report. But the meeting agenda itself has to include, right, those strategies for how do we engage people in the fact that they're in the room together or they're virtually online together. They have this time and space together. What powerful questions are we asking for them to address? Otherwise, people will fall off. People will say, I didn't really need to attend that meeting because all I was going to do was be read a report and I could read the report. And so really important, I think, even during that early part of the orientation and onboarding, about how their times will be used.
Paul,
And then
I
we just
like
get into,
to,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to add, I like to ask that question, like when I prepare the things that I'm going to report on with my board is, could this have been an email? Could this have been an email? No. If the answer is no, or we need more engagement, then, I feel like we're on the right track.
Yeah, and here's when people tell me, yeah, but they won't read the email. I'll say they won't read the email because they don't have to, because they know they're going to give a report on it. So why would I read the email? So if the practice starts to become, you need to read that email because the discussion we're going to have is going to be based upon in part information that was in that email, right? It's already starting to build in, as well as you might from the very beginning. How do things work around here? And that's, yeah, for us, that's pretty important. And then you get people who are more task-oriented versus relationship-oriented. I don't know, maybe observe this in your own boards. Some people there are there for the relationships. They want to meet people and communicate their ideas, and they're to listen and they'll question, and they're really good at the relationship part. Some people are much more about the tasks. Tell me what needs to be done. Why we're doing it. What are the results we're trying to produce? And you have to understand what's motivating. And this is where the board chair, the mentors, understanding where people are with task and relationship. If you're too task focused, I think that takes away from some of the really important, board members who have valuable skills in that relationship behavior and practice. Same thing too, if you're too much about the relationships, now are we really about doing things here? Are we about, producing results? Or is this more of a time to socialize and, have, our enjoyment, but not really advance the organization's purposes? And so just understanding how people are motivated that way, we think is really helpful. All right, a few minutes left. So I just wrote down some of the roles that we are asking directors to sometimes play. No one person is going to be amazing at all of these, but I think part of the orientation and onboarding is finding out pretty quickly, where people are passionate about, either because they come with a skill set and knowledge and experience in these areas. So, they're great at evaluating or planning, or maybe even coaching, which can be really, really helpful. Or externally, they are your networkers, or they're your pollinators. Like they are people that just get around to different organizations, and that's really, something that separates them in terms of that skill. Or recruiting itself, like the ability to recruit those to the organization. So again, sharing this early, that there is these different roles within the board role, where again, not any one person is going to be the most amazing, but where you might be amazing, is something I think is really helpful. Of course, fundraising. Oh, by the way, yeah, I didn't mention fundraising. The percentages on this are pretty straightforward. If it's not in the position description or in any of the conversations before you join a board that you will be a fundraiser, and then you ask them to be a fundraiser, you know, in orientation or onboarding, the percentage of them being a good fundraiser is incredibly low, because they see it as kind of a, you know, they see it as a misrepresentation of the experience. If you say that resource development and fundraising will be part of the role, then at least they're going to be more open to it. Doesn't mean they're going to be all amazing fundraisers, but at least they'll be more open to the idea and perhaps building those capacities to be amazing fundraisers for the organization. So don't think by hiding the fundraising requirement, right, before orientation and onboarding, that somehow that's going to be the elixir here. Instead, what we think is being able to meet people and say, of course, you know, this organization relies on our ability, you know, to raise resources. And we think we're going to be able to make that possible, even if it's not something you're maybe excited about right now. And then be truthful about that, about how that might look for your organization. So here's just some 7 observations we have from the field. 1, we think relationships are foundational. It takes time to develop them. Do it. Be purposeful about it. You know, if you don't understand your role as a director, you're kind of like an actor without a script. You're kind of then always improvising, you know, how well will that work in the long run? I think having a script of what you're expected to do is helpful. If we don't invest, especially early in our new board members, then we shouldn't, you know, be surprised if we don't get much in return. It does take an investment. So to some of your, you know, points, like Michelle had made this too, this is going to take time. This is going to take effort. Absolutely right. The whole point is that investment will be worth it. The investment will be worth it. I like to value new board members' inexperience with an organization. That can tell me an awful lot, right? The fact that they don't know the organization so well. Perhaps they come with the same type of opinions, or, you know, the same type of observations that those who are not closely connected to the organization come with. And that can be really valuable. So when someone says, well, I don't know much about this, or I only know a little bit about it, that can be exactly what the rest of the board needs to know. To say, yeah, well, tell us more about that. Because that might have, you know, be a reflection of how the organization's communicating more broadly. Encouraging questions. By the way, I love questions. Powerful questions, I think, really help us lead. I think I already said the chair and mentor roles are often underutilized. You know, most new board members do not stop attending meetings or contributing to projects because the role is too difficult. They do so because they're uncertain about how they're contributing and whether their contributions actually make a difference. If a board member can say, it didn't matter if I went to that meeting, then we have not done our job through orientation and onboarding to say, it absolutely matters if you were here or not. You're not being here matters for the, you know, all the reasons I had aforementioned, because of that, you know, purposeful recruitment, and because what they're contributing, right, has been, you know, amplified and talked about and discussed in your one-on-ones with your chair and mentor and perhaps others. I'll stop there for final questions.
I have a couple.
Sure.
I think, again, going back to the board the current makeup that I have of my board, you know, I continually get pushback about a board member's financial contribution to our organization. And I don't know. I mean, I have a board interview in a couple of weeks, and I can certainly set that expectation with that person, but knowing that the others of my board members have not done that, like how do you tackle that is my one question. And maybe I'll just let you answer that one first.
Yeah, it is a question that we get quite often, especially if you've inherited kind of the inertia of it not being a point of emphasis, like a give or get, you know, part of that role. And so again, I think this kind of go back to what I said before. I think it's a conversation that the board has to have around itself, is what positions us to be most successful here. And if we did add such a feature to that board description, what do we think is the one that fits who we are? You know, would it limit us in those board members that we know we need to attract because they might not be individually financially capable of making a certain amount or threshold contribution? So then it might be one of those situations where you say, well, don't give until it hurts, give until it feels good, kind of, you know, ability kind of, you know, to contribute. I think around you, what the culture is here is about clearly you've given your time, clearly you've given your talent. We're not undervaluing that. What we're saying is this is the reason why we're asking for a financial contribution if we are, or we're asking for you to, perhaps participate in ways that can help us develop financial contributions.
Good. I like that. Then my other question is around board retreats, which I know you didn't cover here, but I think it's beneficial for boards to have that time to have a retreat. But like, who kind of initiates that idea and who should attend?
Yes, I love the retreats after you've done work like one-on-one. I think retreats otherwise that's just my opinion about retreats. Retreats with a purpose can be great. I think you again want to understand before I go into a retreat, what's our purpose here, right? Is it that introduction of new people to existing people? Is there additional work we're trying to get done during the retreat? With almost everything I do, especially it takes time to structure, and put resources into it. So what are the outcomes we want from this work? And again, finding a champion, like if someone really is passionate about this, that is already the stakeholder within the organization, wonderful, excellent. But something where you think we could use some outside, perhaps direction, there's opportunities for that too. Wonderful.
Thanks.
Well, I know Shelley wanted a few minutes at the very end. If you have any further questions, please contact me. By the way, if you didn't have questions, I had questions myself, because that's preparation.
Yeah.
Yes, there's my email, phone number, our website. Always happy to chat. But Shelley, go ahead.
That's so wonderful, Paul. Thank you again for the content. It's a good refresher, and I've gotten some really good reminder ideas to revisit my even I have some thoughts about the new board members that I brought in on July 1. We gave them so much information right out of the gate. We're halfway now through that first year. It's a great time to pull that new cohort of board members, together and sort of temperature check. How much do they still need to learn? How can I help that? So you really provided some good perspective. So thank you so much. So we are about at time, and so I really appreciate everyone for joining. If you do have a few more seconds, a few more minutes, I'd love to give our nonprofit community an update on a bill that is making its way through the House of Representatives right now that directly could impact every nonprofit organization in the country. So I think I'll transition. So if anybody wants to stay on and get that content, we'll kind of keep recording. So just to kind of let everybody know, there is a House bill right now. It's HR 9495. The actual title of the bill is Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostage Acts. Seems like totally reasonable to me. The challenge is there is language in the bill that a portion of the bill grants the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, the power to designate any 501c3 organization as a terrorist supporting organization at the sole discretion of the Secretary. The Secretary wouldn't be required to offer evidence or reasoning to the accused organization despite the absence of what defines terrorist supporting organizations within the bill. Ultimately, it would give unprecedented potential political power over the status of 501c3 exempt organizations without explanation. The Council on Foundations, other organizations have been all over this bill. It was originally proposed in September. So after failing just last week in the House, the bill is making it back. It went back through the House and Means Committee, passed committee, and is now back again just this week for a vote. So to kind of help set the stage of why this is concerning, so organizations like ACLU, Amnesty International, Earthrights, Greenpeace, the NCAA, Planned Parenthood, Southern Poverty Law Center, Stop Hate AAP have all opposed this bill. So it gives the Secretary of the Treasury the ability to basically title an organization as a hate group and eliminate their 501c3 tax status. So I'll tell you the implications for us as a community foundation. We have a policy in place that requires us to not grant. So we oversee a number of donor advised funds. If a donor advised fund advises to make a grant to one of these organizations that's been designated, as a terrorist organization, we can't grant to them. And then the downstream effect. Well, what if our board says, well, we're not going to follow that. We are going to grant to them. You can see the ripple effects that we as a community foundation could be in jeopardy as well of our tax exempt status for having granted to a designated terrorist organization. Think about organizations in our communities that support immigrant rights groups, environmental advocates, healthcare, nonprofit organization, educational institution that close gaps for opportunity, small grassroots organizations, BIPOC-led initiatives, community advocates, and organizations that have historically served marginal populations. So we're very concerned. And this is at a stage where it is being voted on right now. We are at a time where, there's a lot of political noise happening, and it's just not been given the attention that I think it might have in other times. So this is why at the top of the hour, I mentioned the importance and vital role the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance plays to our sector. If you are a member, you would have received an email today that basically kind of summarized their opposition and gave an opportunity for you to click a link to express your opposition to our House member. Well, Mariannette Miller Meeks is the House Congresswoman who represents Johnson County. She's a Republican, and we may not change the outcome or the vote, but it's so important to express opposition and concern, because maybe there's an opportunity where the unintended consequences, downstream effect, are just not really fully understood, because we are working in the sector. We understand what this means to the organizations that we work with. So I will pause there with my summary of concern. Paul, I'd love to have you jump in if you have any additional feedback that you'd like to add kind of on behalf of the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance, and I'll open it up to any questions that the audience might have.
Sure, and now I'm going to put that hat on here as being a member of the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance. So thank you, Shelley. I think you explained it very well. Of course, we're against charitable and philanthropic organizations being used to advance terrorist activity. We're absolutely opposed to that. The challenge here is that it is so vague. Like there is nothing within this rule or this this bill that even says that the organization that's been put on notice is even told what's been put on notice for. Right? It's simply up to the whims of an individual in one role. And so what we're saying is, hey, if we're going to bolster and improve this area, we agree we are already very cognizant of it. This is not the way to do it. In fact, this allows for this parade of potential horribles, which affects organizations in our communities, across Iowa and across the country and around the world. So that's why we're being so thoughtful about it. And I've met with Congress, person Mariannette Miller Meeks' staff about nonprofit entity topics, and they've been very, responsive oftentimes. And so if you have a chance to write a letter, whether it's one of these letters or otherwise engage, even if you're uncertain about what it is, just saying, hey, what we want to make certain is that what we don't want is kind of an unscrupulous use of power to be able to then deny tax exemption for otherwise legally, engaging, legally performing organizations, would be our guidance. And very much open to questions.
Yeah, that's helpful, Paul. Thank you.
Can you forward if we're not a part of the alliance?
Yes. Yeah, Sarah, I'll forward you, and anyone else who's on the call that would like information, email me. My email is, because I'll just reply to your email directly. That would be most helpful, so I can make sure I can get everyone. My email is Shelley, SHELLY at CFJC, so for Community Foundation Johnson County.org. I'll forward you my summary email that I provided to my board, so you can kind of get all of the pieces. And I also attached to that the information that came from the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance as well, so you can see both pieces that we're working on. I know it's very concerning. Just there could just be unintended consequences or intended
I was
consequences.
just say, I think they're intended, actually.
Yeah, I'm trying to be diplomatic.
Yeah, this is terrifying, actually. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, because I had not paid attention to that.
Yeah, well, and it's been one of those pieces where it's kind of not been in attention. And fortunately, you know, our advocacy circles, my advocacy circle is the Council on Foundations in Washington, DC, plus, you know, other nonprofit sectors who are looking, you know, looking at every piece of legislation that happens. So fortunately, we have some guardrails. Great. Okay, well, more to come on that. Great. Again, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for your leadership to the nonprofit sector. We certainly appreciate all that you do for us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great seeing you all. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.